The ranch had always been quiet in the early mornings. Even after 40 years of marriage, Clara Whitmore still woke before the sun, slipping out of bed while the house was wrapped in shadows and memory. The Texas sky stretched wide and pale beyond the windows, and the land, thousands of acres of mesquite, rolling pasture, and creeks that cut silver lines through the soil, waited the way it always had. Patient. Enduring. Her husband, Hank, used to wake with her. He'd pull on his boots, sip coffee at the kitchen table, and talk through the day's plans as if the ranch itself were another member of the family. Since his death 3 weeks earlier, the mornings felt heavier. The house was too still. His boots remained by the door, untouched. Clara had been the ranch wife to most people. The woman who cooked for crews, kept the books, remembered birthdays, and smiled politely when Hank handled the business. She never corrected anyone. She didn't need to. Hank knew who truly kept the operation running. At the funeral, the chapel overflowed with ranch hands, neighboring landowners, feed suppliers, oil field contractors, and families who'd been tied to the Whitmores for generations. Men who took off their hats when Clara passed. Women who hugged her tightly and whispered prayers. Their daughter, Madison, arrived late. She swept in wearing black designer heels that sank into the soft dirt of the parking lot. Her sunglasses stayed on through the service. She cried loudly, dramatically, drawing attention without ever once reaching for her mother's hand. At the reception afterward, tables spread under a tent near the barn, Madison cornered Clara near the coffee urn. She leaned in, lips tight with something that looked like sympathy but wasn't. "Well," Madison said, her voice low and sharp, "I guess it's time we talk about next steps." Clara nodded slowly. Madison smirked. "Mom, you don't need to worry yourself. You can stick to cooking and your garden. I've already talked to some developers. This land is worth a fortune. Luxury townhomes, private roads, maybe a golf course." She glanced around at the dusty boots and weathered faces nearby, disdain flickering across her eyes. "It's time to modernize." Clara didn't respond. Madison mistook the silence for weakness. "I'll handle everything," she added. "I know Dad would have wanted that." Clara smiled politely, the way she always had. That night, alone in the house, Clara opened Hank's safe. Inside were deeds, ledgers, old photographs, and a neatly folded envelope with her name written in Hank's steady hand. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd planned cattle rotations and weathered droughts, and opened it. "Clara. This ranch was never just mine. It was ours. But the truth is, it only works because of you. So it's yours now. All of it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The paperwork confirmed it. Every acre. Every mineral right. Every contract. Solely hers. Clara didn't cry. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the safe. Then she made a list. The next morning, she began making calls. She called Miguel, whose grandfather had broken horses for Hank's father. She called Ruth, who ran the feed supply and had extended credit through bad years without ever asking twice. She called Earl, who oversaw the water rights and knew every inch of underground flow. She called the oil supplier who fueled their equipment, the fencing company that had worked the land since the 1960s, and the ranch hands who trusted the Whitmore name more than contracts. She didn't tell them what Madison planned. She simply asked questions. What would happen, Clara said calmly, if this ranch stopped being a ranch? There was silence on the other end of every line. Then answers. "We wouldn't be part of that. We don't work with developers. That land deserves better." Clara thanked them and hung up. Madison announced the development deal a week later, strutting into the house with glossy brochures and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "I've got buyers lined up," she said. "We'll be signing soon." Clara poured tea. "Have you talked to the people who make this place run?" Madison laughed. "Mom, they're employees. They'll do what they're told." Clara said nothing. The developers arrived 2 days later. Suits. Smiles. Promises of millions. But the cracks showed immediately. No ranch hands would stay on. No suppliers would sign new contracts. The water rights were complicated, Clara's rights, not Madison's. The access roads crossed neighboring lands whose owners suddenly became unavailable. Within 48 hours, the deal collapsed. Madison's phone rang non-stop. Her emails went unanswered. The same people who once praised her vision quietly withdrew. She stormed into Clara's kitchen, fury blazing. "What did you do?" Madison demanded. Clara met her gaze for the first time with steel instead of softness. "I listened," she said. Madison scoffed. "You ruined everything." "No," Clara replied calmly. "You tried to sell something that was never yours." Madison left that night, slamming the door behind her. She didn't come back. Clara grieved the loss of her daughter the way she'd grieved Hank, quietly, privately, without spectacle. But grief didn't stop her from working. Over the next year, Clara transformed the ranch. She partnered with conservation groups. She converted parts of the land into protected wildlife corridors. She opened small eco-lodges built by local craftsmen. She offered horseback experiences led by ranch hands who finally received recognition and profit sharing for their expertise. Visitors came from across the country. Families. Researchers. Students. People who wanted to learn how land could be respected instead of exploited. The ranch thrived. Clara stood taller. She spoke at county meetings. She negotiated contracts. She made decisions Hank would have trusted her with all along. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land gold, Miguel rode up beside her. "Boss," he said with a smile. Clara smiled back. The ranch wasn't a monument to the past anymore. It was a future, built on loyalty, patience, and a woman who had finally stepped fully into the power she'd always held. And she had done it quietly. The ranch didn't just survive, it began to breathe again. By the second year, word had spread far beyond the county lines. Clara Whitmore's land was no longer spoken of as that old family spread, but as a living example of how tradition and progress could exist without destroying each other. College students arrived in dusty vans to study sustainable grazing. Wildlife biologists tracked the return of quail and antelope. Families booked months in advance for weekends where children learned to ride horses, mend fences, and understand where food truly came from. Clara watched it all with a quiet sense of awe. She still rose before dawn. Still drank her coffee at the same kitchen table. But now her mornings included emails from environmental groups, calls from universities, and invitations to speak at agricultural conferences, places she'd never been asked to enter before. At first, she almost said no. Then she remembered Hank's letter. "It only works because of you." So she went. On a stage in Austin, wearing boots beneath a modest blazer, Clara spoke plainly. No buzzwords. No polished jargon. She talked about droughts that nearly broke them. About nights she balanced books by hand because computers were too expensive. About ranch hands who stayed loyal even when paychecks were late. About land that remembered kindness. The audience rose to their feet. Meanwhile, Madison watched all of this from afar. At first, she told people her mother had been manipulated. Then she claimed the ranch was temporary and that she'd get it back eventually. But developers stopped returning her calls. Her lifestyle, built on anticipated inheritance, began to crumble. Credit cards maxed out. Friends drifted away when the luxury dinners stopped. One afternoon, nearly 3 years after Hank's funeral, Madison drove back down the long dirt road to the ranch. She barely recognized it. The gate bore a new sign, Whitmore Land Stewardship, Preserving Legacy, Protecting Future. The pastures were greener than she remembered. Children laughed near the stables. Solar panels gleamed near the old barn. Madison parked and stepped out, heels sinking into the earth just like they had at the funeral. Clara was overseeing a group of interns, calmly explaining water rotation systems. She looked older, but stronger. Grounded. Madison waited until the group dispersed. "Mom," she said. Clara turned. Her face revealed nothing. They stood in silence, the Texas wind moving between them. "I didn't come for money," Madison said finally, her voice tight. I didn't know you were capable of this." Clara studied her daughter for a long moment. "I've always been capable," she replied softly. "You just never needed to see it." Madison swallowed. "I thought strength looked like control." Clara shook her head. "Strength looks like responsibility." They didn't reconcile that day. There were no hugs. No tears. Just truth, hard and honest, like the land beneath their feet. Madison left again. But this time, she left changed. Months later, a letter arrived. An apology. No demands. No expectations. Just regret. Clara placed it in the same safe as Hank's letter. She continued building, not just a business, but a legacy rooted in respect. Years passed. When Clara finally stepped back from daily operations, the ranch didn't falter. The people she had empowered carried it forward. Miguel became director of operations. Ruth's son took over supply logistics. Profit sharing ensured everyone had a stake, not just in money, but in meaning. On the anniversary of Hank's death, Clara stood at the edge of the land as the sun set wide and endless. She whispered, "We did it." The ranch wasn't sold. It wasn't broken. It wasn't forgotten. It had become something rarer than wealth. A promise kept. The final chapter came quietly, the way Clara Whitmore preferred everything important to come. One crisp autumn morning, years later, Clara walked the fence line one last time. The ranch stretched endlessly before her, golden grass swaying, cattle grazing calmly, windmills turning slow and steady. Children's voices drifted from the learning lodge in the distance. Life, honest and full, everywhere she looked. She stopped at the old oak where Hank used to tie his horse. "I kept it whole," she said softly. "Just like you asked." When Clara passed away peacefully months later, the town expected chaos, lawsuits, family drama, land disputes. None came. Her will was simple and unshakable. The ranch would never be sold. Ownership would remain in a land trust. Profits would fund conservation, ranch families, and rural education. Madison received no land, only a handwritten letter. "I loved you enough to let you lose what you didn't respect. If you ever learn to build instead of take, you'll always have a place here." Madison read the letter alone. This time, she cried. Today, the Whitmore Ranch stands as one of the most successful eco-ranches in the region. Universities study it. Families depend on it. Travelers remember it. And Clara Whitmore, once dismissed as just a ranch wife, is remembered as something far greater. A woman who outlived greed. A woman who chose legacy over ego. A woman who proved that quiet strength can change everything.